we're going to get started here. If you guys have any questions, please go ahead, enter them into the Q&A panel. If you're following along and you hear something interesting you want to share with everyone, we're going to be using the hashtag SaaS Churn Webinar. I just threw that in to the chat so everyone can copy and paste that. So thanks to my wonderful guests, Casey Bain, who is a longtime friend of mine and expert in SaaS. She's currently the CMO at RedStamp, but also previous SaaS companies, Olark and FreshBooks. She's been around the biz for quite some time and always impresses me with the knowledge and expertise that she carries. And also Anna Tallarico from Beacon 9 and SaaSX. Also quite knowledgeable in the space, co-founded, correct me here, Anna, Ion Interactive, and is now doing SaaS consulting through Beacon 9. Lots and lots of insights from Anna. And very honored to have both of you join me today on this webinar. So as I said in the beginning, I'm going to be managing the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please go ahead, throw them in the Q&A. We are going to be recording this. We're recording it right now, and I'll follow up later on with a recording. So without further ado, Anna, please go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. I know Casey and I are both super excited to be here, and I'm excited to share some of our churn and retention stories because we have such different experience and different types of companies that share so many similarities. So I think churn reduction strategies really do run the gamut across, different industries and different price points and different, even go-to-market models. You mentioned we are all tweeting along at SaaS Churn Webinar, so I hope everybody will join us. But let's go ahead and jump right in with this quote, which I both hate and love. A high churn rate is toxic to any SaaS business. And there comes a point in every, I think, SaaS that the reality of that really hits home. It might be that we're on a revenue treadmill. It might be that we just can't, acquire new customers fast enough because of the burn off from churn. But there comes this point when we realize sort of the business and revenue impacts of churn and how toxic it can be, and sometimes just kind of insidious and even catching, I think, founding teams off guard. But this quote, I think, is why churn is the dirty secret of SaaS, of the SaaS world. I will never forget when I first read this quote. It was right as my company was being sold or being acquired. And it was like this kind of sigh of relief that somebody was out there saying it, because when I talk to founders and they list their biggest challenges, churn is almost never mentioned as a problem. But as soon as you start talking about the business, churn suddenly is the biggest problem. So it's like we know, none of us really want to talk about it. And I think it is really healthy to have people who've lived through some churn challenges talk more openly about it, because we shouldn't sort of be brushing it under the rug and pretending like it's not there. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I wanted to share just really quickly 60-second stories from both Casey and I and sort of our personal history with churn. I characterize mine as a roller coaster. Having run a SaaS business for about 12 years, I had the highs and the lows. I had gross churn, really good, sort of gross retention strong and net retention weak. I had the inverse. I had times when it was all firing on all cylinders and everything was going right, gross and net retention was strong. And then I had that horrible sort of brick wall moment where neither retention rates were good. So I've sort of definitely lived through it all, even at one point reducing our churn by half. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about today are those things that I found worked really well. And Casey's got a great perspective on this too.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, like Mark said, I've worked for a lot of different SaaS tech companies over my career. And really, I think a roller coaster is the best way to describe it. Churn is one of those things where it's easy to ignore it, especially if your top of funnel is doing great. But it's one of those things where, you know, when you're losing customers, it's often not just customers going out of business or, you know, that kind of thing, but it could be really indicative of a greater problem or something in your product that you really need to take a look at. So it's been really interesting. I've ran tons of experiments, everything from super hands-on, you know, consulting and that kind of thing, where we really help the customer get accustomed to the product and really have like a very personalized onboarding, all the way through to different drip campaigns, you know, in-app notifications and all of that kind of stuff. So I look forward to sharing a lot more of that with all of you today.
Awesome.
Thanks,
so that's
Casey.
what,
Anna, I'm just going to jump in with a question here.
Sure.
Actually, two good ones that are been asked that are very related. What do you think the best of breed churn rate is? And the second one is what's considered a high churn rate in regards to ARR?
I love this question. And we've got 2 slides away. I'm going to give you what I think is one of the best answers to that question. So I'm so glad that was asked. So really quick, we're going to cover what gross and net churn are, just because one of the things I find, it's such a fundamental thing, and you ask 10 founders, do you know what that is? And they'll say yes. Or you ask 10 CFOs and they'll say yes. But when you actually ask them to define it, they're slightly different definitions. So it's kind of crazy. So I just want to quickly define those. And then we're going to talk about, you know, the sort of the customer retention recipe. And I think of those almost as the long-term things that we have to have in place to retain customers, how we create a culture of customer retention across the whole organization. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time on quick churn fixes, because those are the things that really made the dramatic impact during that period when we were reducing our churn by 50%. It just like was a series of executing these things that in the moment, not one really felt high impact, but when we added them all up together over a really short period of time, they were super high impact. So that's what we're going to cover. Really quickly, I'm going to talk about gross and net, and then I'm going to get to that stat that our audience asked. But this is the only time I'm going to read. But I like to read the definition because I'd like to not screw it up either, just like everybody that you talk to kind of somehow screws it up. So this definition is from Gecko Board. Gross monthly recurring revenue, MRR churn rate, so gross churn, is the percentage of revenue lost due to cancellations or downgrades. So I always think about, like, if I had 10 customers coming up for renewal in a certain period and 9 of them renew, right, I've got 90% gross retention. It estimates like the total loss to the company, but net churn rate calculates the relative loss because it subtracts expansion MRR. So here we go. Let me just give you one more definition really quickly. Again, I hate to read, but I have to. ChartMogul. Net negative revenue churn happens when the positive impact of account expansions outweighs the negative impact of account cancellations and downgrades. So we're talking about net revenue churn. If you start the year with 100 customers, all paying $10 a month, 10 cancel during the course of the year, but 90 remain, 20 upgrade to a higher plan per month, then the change to the cohort of the 100 customers is therefore a net increase in MRR, even though you lost customers. So net includes those the expansion revenue. So anyway, lost revenue from probably unhappy customers canceling versus the gained revenue from customers upgrading, and that's net. So that's the end of my reading, I promise. But I will say that gross and net both matter, and a lot of people don't realize that. You know, I have been in a situation where the company was growing because we were expanding customers so quickly, so their growth might have been 50, 60% a year, but we were losing more customers than we were acquiring, right? So and that doesn't fly, right? It doesn't fly with the institutional sort of environment with, you know, financials that might be looking at you, or, you know, so it's really important that you have both strong gross and net retention. So here's the answer to that question. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I jump in for a second, Anna?
Please.
Yeah. So to really second that, when you are going through periods as a company of really strong growth, you want to make sure that you are looking at both gross and net churn. because that's really going to impact your lifetime value of your customers. If you're getting a lot of customers in, but they're not staying with you, that's a different kind of problem to have, and it's going to affect some of your other metrics. So really important to be able to differentiate between the two.
Yeah, and so I couldn't agree more. I love this one because this is from Barometrics, so answering that audience question. You do find with SMB that churn tends to be higher, and that's sort of accepted. We know that, right? There's a lot more volatility in those customers. So 3 to 5% monthly is kind of standard. And at the enterprise level, which is a product and a sort of market that tends to be stickier, less than 1% monthly. So to answer that first question, this is good. I'm going to tell you honestly, I've lived through periods at my SaaS and with clients where churn was nowhere near this. I mean, it was so much worse than these numbers. And I've very rarely meet founders and entrepreneurs that are running SaaS businesses that have attained this. Like, this is where it should be, and this is what a healthy SaaS should be at. But this is sort of the holy grail, right? And we all work really hard to get there, and it's a work in progress, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things too is that you might be thinking, okay, why is it 5% and why is it not 0%? But I mean, there's going to be customer changes that you can't, that are outside of your control. So things like if your customers go out of business, if they pivot themselves. So one of the really important things that I've found is just adding in when people are canceling, making sure that either your sales rep or if they're doing it online in a self-serve, that you're getting that kind of information. It's great so that potentially you can save them, but more so just as a learning experience for yourself to really figure out, okay, when my customer, gets above 50 employees, they tend to churn. So at least you'll have that information for yourself. So really important to take a look at this when you're looking at these percentages.
That's such a good point too about tracking your churn reasons, because even that can go back to ideal customer profile and evolving that, right? If you're looking at this kind of segment is churning for this reason, well, maybe we should stop. We can either try and fix the problem, or maybe we should stop selling to those. So there's lots of different ways to kind of slice it, but you've got to know why they're leaving, and you've got to segment the customer base for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the customer retention recipe. And these are the more sort of foundational long range things that we have to do. This is the environment we have to be able to retain customers and even have a hope of retaining them. So the number one thing is going to be really obvious, and I think we all know it, but a great product. I think though, sometimes we want to think that the product isn't the problem, but we really have to go back, which is why I always have it first on the list. Without a great product, you're fighting an uphill battle, right? And I think the climate right now, there's so many choices in SaaS and a lot of times we're talking about things that are viewed, unfortunately, as disposable, or we're trying to create a SaaS model where, people are recurring and they're renewing over a period of a year, 2, 3 years, but it's not the kind of product that actually wants to be consumed like that. That's not how our audience wants to. They don't think of it like that. They might think about it as something they use for a few months and don't, and then do again. So it's just like, we've got to have a product that actually, has sort of renewal built into it that somebody wants to consume on an ongoing basis. And there are so many SaaS products right now, and so the standards are higher, and yet the more solutions that come online, somehow some of them, it becomes more disposable. So that's just fundamental.
And one of the things for product as well is this is where you really want to make sure that your marketing team and your product team are working very closely together. And also, if you have a customer success or a customer support team, make sure that all of the teams in your company are really communicating well, because you're going to want to know that the words and that the problems that your customers are actually addressing are the same things that you're using in your marketing, but also are the same messaging and the same verbiage that you're using in the product. When I was at Olark Live Chat, I was there during a time when the market was pretty competitive, as it is right now for live chat, but a lot of the terminology that we had used in our product from the early days of chat were becoming less common, and our customers were referring to features in a different way. So they were coming to our product, they were excited to use us, but they were stumbling because they couldn't find the feature that they were looking for. And that was causing unnecessary stress for the customers and could lead to increased churn. So really making sure that all of your teams are just coordinating with each other, because like Anna said, the product itself could be great, but if there are those inconsistencies between the other teams and really what your prospects and customers are saying, that's where you're gonna run into some trouble, and where you can just really streamline things.
That's such a good point, right? If you have a great product, but you're not positioning it correctly and messaging around it correctly, then they don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the right customers, this is a big one. We have to sell to the right customers. We have to be saying the right things to the right customers. Marketing needs to be attracting our ideal customer profile. And one of the things I like to I have a litmus test is like, does the entire organization, and I mean down, from the office manager to the CEO, know what the ideal customer profile is? Because the sales team will know, marketing will probably know, customer success might know, but like, outside of that, a lot of times the rest of the organization doesn't know. So know your ideal customer and be rigorous and always refining that. And like you talked about, segmenting and making sure that you're targeting the right people. But I think you've got to say the right things to attract the right people. Sales has to set the right expectations. They have to know how to sidestep those customers that aren't ideal. And you have to keep that so visible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is very important, especially with your sales team. This is something that I've worked on while I was at FreshBooks as well. We would get lots of people. I mean, we were doing tons of cool marketing, a great marketing team there doing lots of really innovative things. So we'd have all sorts of people coming to us for essentially accounting software. But I remember one customer in particular who had like a manufacturing business, which our product was not made for. They were super nice. We had a great conversation and they were really excited about our product. But what I said to them was, hey, you know what? Like there are some workarounds so we can kind of make this work. But at the end of this, like we are not going to be friends. You're going to be frustrated with me. I'm going to be frustrated with you. There's going to be huge support costs for my organization. So really and at the end of it, we are still, we've kept in touch over the years and that kind of thing. It's great to have customers like that. Even if they don't work out for one company, you never know when your paths will cross again. But really like empowering your sales team and your customer support team, really anyone customer facing, to know who your ideal customer is. And when you're talking to somebody, being able to say, you know what, like this really isn't the best fit for you. I could recommend these other solutions. And then you're able to position yourself and your company as kind of that thought leader and that trusted partner without incurring, the churn that's going to come from it, the high customer support cost, and just like the negative goodwill.
And this has to come from the top, because if there's just pressure to land new customers, if there's just that pressure, in this, then it's like really hard to do both at once. You've got to serve one master. It's hard to serve both really, really well. So you've got to be empowered from the top down to sell to the right customer and not just take any deal that comes through the door. That's a delicate balance, definitely.
Yeah, and even for that, like there's the idea, of course, of doing what's best for the company, or for the customer. But when you look at it, even from an ROI perspective, when you get the wrong customers in, they are going to cost your business more money than you are getting from them. So,
Totally.
From both sides of the coin, there are definitely benefits. But yeah, you want to make sure that your whole organization is aligned and also like rewarded for doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So really quickly, I will say quick time to value, I think is super important, because you can have the best product in the world, you can have the perfect customer, but if they don't have momentum from being a prospect to a customer, you're stalled. Like that's a retention risk from day one. So we want to like minimize the gap from I'm signing up to I'm starting to see demonstrable value. So I will leave it at that for now, but I will just say really critically look at how fast are your customers able to get some kind of value, because you don't want a lag there. And then I've started to use this term a lot, Casey. I don't know how familiar you are. I know you're familiar with active SaaS. I don't know if you've heard the term before.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear your definition too.
So I know so many of your products had this, so I was curious, but we've started to use it a lot just to indicate sort of the SaaS that is always in your face. They're reminding you, they're showing you metrics. The pulse and the heartbeat is apparent, right? So it's coming to you versus you having to go to it. And I think I see more and more that it's really hard to retain customers if it's just kind of sitting over there, right? Because again, if it's not mission critical, it can get dusty. It can kind of sit over there and get forgotten about as priorities, but you've really got to be in the face of the customer, I think.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly it. And really, like all of this kind of stuff matters, from onboarding to really like what you're doing every month to like regain the trust and regain kind of like re-show your value to the customer. So everything from like email drip campaigns, in-app wizards, webinars, training, having your team do, you know, check-in calls and all of that kind of stuff. You really want to make sure that you have a process in place. You can A/B test all of this to figure out what works. Some customer groups are going to love, you know, the check-in calls to see how they're doing, where other people might like, you know, more customizable drip campaigns. And if you're using a marketing automation system, which you definitely should be, you can really connect things with your SaaS app as well. So I've set up things for clients in HubSpot where, depending on what people do or don't do in the app, they'll get different email drip campaigns. So you're really able to see what your customer is using or not using, and be able to really drive them to like, hey, you haven't looked at the dashboard lately and your numbers are up this %. Like, why don't you go see what the whole picture looks like right now? And really just showing your value and becoming like an integral part of that, of your client's business.
Yeah. So sometimes I'll when we're trying to fix a short, I don't even have this in the short-term part of it, but when we're trying to fix a sort of short-term term problem, we'll often just say, what is the most valuable piece of information that could get passed around the entire organization without a lot of context? And people will go, wow, that's important. That's valuable. Yep. And then figure out a way for your product to push that, you know, so that it can be shared, it can be passed around. It's so, so important. All right, this is a big one. We're going to spend a few minutes on this one, all right, Casey?
Yes.
Definitely. So this has got to be part of your culture, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's got to be from across the entire organization. And we'll talk a little bit how this is not just a customer success function at all. It really matters across the whole organization, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is something like, it really ties into a few of the things that we've mentioned already, but really like lifetime value and that kind of thing. If you need a metric to drive to, lifetime value is really an important one that will help you reduce churn, make sure that you're getting the right customers in the door, and really encouraging your team to be focused on that. I mean, number of new customers is always important, but that can kind of sidetrack you from taking care of the customers that you do have and like really building a strong, sustainable business. So you want to make sure that that's really ingrained, not only in metrics, but in how you talk to your customers, in how you talk to your team, really how you motivate your company to treat your customers and take care of them.
It's interesting because you mentioned lifetime value twice, and it reminds me that like one of the things that I didn't do early enough is make sure that our whole company understood all of those metrics. That they understood CAC, that they understood LTV, that they understood, you know, net and gross. Like, I think that if you're in a SaaS organization, like you're leading a SaaS organization, you really need to make sure that your entire company understands those key SaaS metrics and really internalizes them and understands the impact that they can have on the business. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a recent convert to this. And again, this is another one of those like mistakes I wish I had sort of solved earlier. It used to be, my company, I led all of the customer facing organizations. So sales, support, customer success. And I was always like, I got these customer retention KPIs, and I never stopped, or it didn't stop early enough and say, wait, everybody, right? This whole company needs a customer retention KPI. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do it earlier enough. And I have just come to say, this is so fundamental that, talking about every department needing to really understand the metrics, every department shares in it, right? It is about engineering. It's about product. It's about operations. And everybody needs to think really critically about how their day-to-day and what they do, you know, from tactics and strategies can impact that number. So I was late to this party, but I really see the benefit now, and it's so important. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I've done in order to really like have all of the departments connect with the customer. When I was at Cashew, an accounting software, which Mark and I also crossed paths at, but I introduced this thing called Bring a Customer to Work Day. So I would have a customer either come in person, or we would video chat them in for our morning meeting. and give the whole team an opportunity to ask the customer questions, not only about the product, but also about the business, about their business, what they struggled with. But it was so interesting to hear our engineers ask follow-up questions to the client when they would say, oh, I wish you had this feature. And they would say, oh, but we do, it's under here. And if you click here and then right click, and they do, and just to like have them interacting with the customer on that level was really interesting. And having, the marketing team facilitate that discussion is help kind of figure out like what beginning questions to ask and kind of help, lead the conversation so that they were able to connect, and we were able to kind of get down to the details where they were able to say, hey, you know what, this is how my work is affecting this real person, and really taking them into consideration.
Love it. Love it. So here's another one. When we're still on creating a customer retention culture. This is one I find a lot as a sort of a gap is if you say to, a SaaS, what's your renewal strategy or your renewal process? And they'll be like, okay, it starts at 90 days before renewal. And I'm like, we got to start on day one. And what I mean by that, most importantly, is that the what you need to renew a customer, right? The health and the sort of usage, and that you are looking at that from day one, and you're constantly monitoring for retention risks from the get-go. And then that when you do that, you can move into proactive versus reactive, right? A lot of churn, sort of strategies are so reactive. But if we're thinking about renewal as it starts on day one, and we have to have the right ingredients for renewals every day of that 365 day, if it's annual, it really changes your mindset, I think.
Yeah, and that's really it. Like, especially with SaaS, you're essentially reselling your clients every month if you're doing a monthly renewal, or every year. But I mean, you're still selling them right from the beginning. One of the things that I've done in the past at Olark, I had an amazing data scientist who I got to work with on my team, but he was able to create a model where for customers who had left us, what kind of the indicators were. So if somebody hasn't logged in 10 days, if somebody, had decreased the number of users, really all kinds of indicators if they haven't opened our last 3 marketing emails. Even without a data scientist, with a lot of the marketing automation tools on the market today, you can create something like that so that you're able to see, this person's kind of turning into like a warning zone. How can we help, reach out to them and make sure that they're successful?
Yeah, and getting that push to you. Like a lot of times, first of all, just knowing that data is important, but also not making your team go splunk around and sleuth for it, but like getting an alert. You come in the morning and you're like, this happened, So I think it's really important to push that for sure. So here's one, again, going back to me being customer facing, that I didn't understand earlier enough, but like customer success takes a village, but it's not a department. So we have a department named customer success, and we tend to put all of the churn and retention responsibilities on that department. But customer success is a mindset. It's a way of doing business. It's a philosophy. And so often we're sort of like looking at a churn problem and looking at customer success. How are they onboarding? What are they saying? How are they renewing? But it's product. It's all these other things. So I think that we have to flip our mindset to that customer success is not, first of all, a solve for a churn problem at all. They're just a piece of the puzzle along with sales and marketing and product and operations and everything else. But it's a way of doing business, Another one for me is customers don't grow or stay on their own. Gainsight has this really great way of saying it, which is like that Gainsight's a customer success software, but they will talk about customers and vendors naturally drift apart. And it's true. No matter how strong your product is, it just happens. So I'm a big advocate for sort of having very intentional departments or functions or people inside of the company who are responsible for making sure that customers grow, because with growth, right, the more people we have, the more users we have, the more departments we have, the more likely we are to retain a customer. So that it's wonderful when that happens organically, like in product-led growth where, Slack, right? You get 1 user and then you get 10 users. Okay, that's a success. But you also have to be intentional about it. And not everybody does have that kind of product-led growth. So it really requires a dedicated function. You can't just think it's happening, and you've got to constantly be working. It's our responsibility as vendors to make sure the customer and vendor relationship doesn't sort of drift apart. So that's a big one for sure.
Anna, let me just jump in here quickly. Product-led growth is really highly relevant at this point in time. For those of you who are looking for more information, my favorite blog right now to talk about that is OpenView Ventures or OpenView Partners. They've produced a lot of really good content on that topic recently.
Yeah, and I think any company should be looking at that and thinking, how do we incorporate this, right? Because I do think there are these sort of companies like Slack where we have these sort of, we can hold them. It's a gold standard of how they've been able to grow. We can't all get there. I just like to be real about that. Not every company is going to be a Slack, but what can you learn from that and those principles of product-led growth and incorporate into your culture, into your product? It's super important. But I think, right, even those companies need this very intentional function. And a lot of times they start off without needing it. And then they sort of realize a few years in, like, wait, we've got to, Dropbox is a great example. It started just sort of product-led growth. And then now they have enterprise sales account reps. So it kind of like, we kind of get to that point where we realize you want not just users to choose you, but you want the organization, the customers, company to choose you. So it's super important. And I love everything that OpenView is putting out on this stuff, Mark. You're so right. So I know, Casey, you've got a lot on this one, right? Give the visible, like just keeping those health metrics in front of everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. And just making it as clear as you can for the company. When I first got into management many years ago, we didn't have a dashboard or anything like that. So what I actually did, I pulled all of our numbers from Salesforce and I just wrote them on a whiteboard in the middle of the office. Everything from that to right now where I have like an automated dashboard screen up on the wall that pulls in metrics from HubSpot and Google Analytics and all kinds of stuff. But you just want to make that visible to people so that they are invested in the metrics, they know what they're dealing with, and also they can see where their work has an impact. So you're able to see like, hey, you know what, this number spiked on Wednesday, and that was because of this big launch that we did, and these people were a part of it. So really, I mean, it does not need to be super high tech. There are lots of great tools out there, but don't let that slow you down while you are implementing, your automated dashboard from the very beginning. I've worked at companies as well where we just got an email every day telling us how many customers we had, what our revenue was for the day. Even just things like that are really motivating for your team, and also just helps people get more comfortable talking about the metrics and tying their work to, having an actionable impact.
I love what you said, sort of just like get it, even if you don't have some fancy way to get it, just get it, because right, it's so easy to say this is some big project. And I often find if I'm looking at a customer, for example, that doesn't have that, as soon as you explain to like the engineering team what sort of usage you need to know, they're so happy to get that and surface it in some way. So it's just a quick little hack even to get it. So I think but a lot of people, when I talk about health, don't know what that is even. So I just wanted to really quickly talk about, you've got to have adoption, you've got to have engagement. Like that's are customers replying to your customer success team? Are they reading and opening your emails? Are they, doing support tickets? Adoption is like, did they get the product off the ground, right? So and then engagement is, are they engaging with your company? And then the usage, right? Are they using the right kinds of features? And then did they get value? And every customer might have a different way that they're going to sort of perceive value. You need to understand what is value to them and did they get it? So I always talk about like, let's figure out a way to look at this, but then specifically, like what can we measure? Logins, are they logging in? How frequently? Key feature adoption, right? There are higher value features in most products. Are your customers using those? Engagement, again, support tickets, community posts. Are they opening emails and clicking through? Usage, so number of seats, features, are they using certain features? The volume of usage, how often they're using it. Again, going back to value, knowing what the customer is going to perceive as value and just figuring out a way to measure. And oftentimes this is going to be qualitative, not quantitative, but like, is a customer receiving value? Is definitely should go into the customer health attributes. And that's sort of the kind of thing we always have to be checking on. And then, a stakeholder or business change can be a risk. So you always want to monitor that. And then another one is just having multiple key stakeholders. Again, you want to be purchased and chosen by the company, not just the users. And so, if your whole relationship between your SaaS and your customers dependent on one key stakeholder or one department, that's a risk. So those are just some of the things when people are like, well, what does that mean, customer health? It's sort of all of these things and figuring out for you, like, Casey's point is like, what are your churn risks that, that they didn't log in for 10 days as a churn risk. So that's a customer health attribute that you're looking at constantly and wanting to monitor.
Yeah. And really along that, like you can just pick one or two metrics to focus on that quarter. At Olark, we would do that all the time when we had a feature that we were really excited about. It's like, how many people can we get to really use this feature and adopt it, in the next 6 weeks? And then that would give us a good idea too, especially if you're building a SaaS product and you're kind of in the early days and you don't want to get like feature bloat. It'll really tell you, hey, you know what? We did a big push for this feature. People weren't really interested in it. So that'll help you kind of focus on what actually matters for your customers.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And then just finally on this customer retention culture across the organization is sort of having this mindset of like whatever it takes within reason, obviously, right? You don't want to throw everything at saving a customer who was never a good fit customer to begin with, but being willing to, fly and camp out on a customer's doorstep if they're a large account and they're at risk, or, being willing to do some, a lot of times we'll see like a product being used the wrong way. We'll use it for you briefly to show you how to use it, those kinds of things, and absorbing those costs. So deciding kind of whatever it takes for your company and your customer and what those sort of boundaries are, but having that mentality that we're not going to let a customer slip through the cracks without knowing that we did whatever it took. And whatever it takes is different for every customer, for sure.
Anna, there's a great podcast on Masters of Scale where Reed interviewed Joe from Airbnb, and they were looking for their first funding round, and the VCs were saying, well, where are your customers? And they were sitting in San Francisco, and Joe said, well, they're in New York. And they said, well, what are you doing here? You need to get to New York. And so Joe and his founders went to their first customers, and they did what it takes. So if you want to learn more about that, Masters of Scale is a great podcast to listen to.
Love it. That's awesome. I don't know if I've heard that one, so I will go check it out. I love that podcast. I don't know if I've heard that story, but so true. And you've got to, it's different for every company. Decide what your whatever it takes is, but be willing to do it for every customer that's at risk of churning, So, that's all the long-term stuff. That's the environment we have to create to have a chance of hitting those sort of holy grail numbers of good, strong retention. But what do you do when you have to improve, customer retention really quickly? Lots of businesses get to this inflection point where they realize maybe churn was left unchecked, or revenue growth was strong enough to sort of sustain some growth for a while, even though they were losing more customers than they require. There's all these like inflection points where a company will get to and go, oh, we better fix this right now. And there are things that you can do to fix it right now, even though you've got to have all those long-term things. So we thought we'd just start with a few of these to leave you with, because you might be on this webinar because you're thinking about churn. I don't know. So here's what not to do. Don't panic, because it doesn't work. And I have seen more companies and people that I know, founders, make really poor choices when they're panicked about retention, firing swaths of the customer base that are really actually great and engaged because they're worried that segment is going to churn out because of data they're looking at. Or it was just like crazy decisions where you look at it in retrospect and go, why did you do that? But that's what happens. Panic sets in. How are we going to stop this number like next month? So you can't do that. I would just sort of say, be reasonable and be reasoned with your choices. The other thing not to do, again, is don't think customer success can fix this alone. So many customer success organizations get so much pressure when there's a retention and churn problem, and it's just the wrong way to think about it. It is marketing, it is sales, it is product, it is engineering. I cannot say it enough. So don't go make your customer success team shake in their boots every day they come to work, worried about, having to report on a customer churn or something and feeling like they are bearing the brunt of this. It's one of the unhealthiest things you can do. And you don't want your front line, your people that are responsible for customer engagement and customer success, to be living in a sort of very fear-filled
Yeah.
kind of world. It's just the wrong energy to create. And then finally, also, please don't discount. It is so tempting to deeply discount to save a customer, right? When you've got a customer really ready to churn, a lot of times I see companies throw out big, crazy, deep discounts and they'll save the customer. So they'll keep the customer count, but then they're eroding revenue. They're eroding their ARPU, and it's a disaster that you will be paying for many years to come. So while it feels like in the moment it's the right thing to do to save a customer by discounting, it is a revenue disaster for sure. So what to do? I always talk about this as it's hand-to-hand combat. Like the gloves come off. What are we going to do every day to save a customer? And go back to company-wide OKRs. I will just say it's the first thing I look at is everybody on the boat? And I will just say though, I say this with a caveat that if you've never had company-wide OKRs and you have a crisis with retention and now you want to give everybody OKRs, go easy and be careful, right? You want to shift the mindset so that everybody is coming in every day thinking, how do we retain customers? But if you give the wrong OKRs or the wrong KPIs, and I think I might have a typo there, sorry, you're gonna again, people are gonna be confused. They're gonna be sort of spastic, sort of trying to feverishly solve things the wrong way. So I will just say you've got to do this if you've got an urgent problem to fix, but also just be mindful and cautious and careful. Mm-hmm. And then triaging by health score, right? Just sort of looking at that data modeling.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to make sure that you are what metrics you want to look at, and pull some historical data too, so that you know what you're dealing with. Like, is this part of a downward trend? Is it some seasonality? Did we just lose a big customer? No matter what the reason is, you want to know what you're dealing with and what metric in particular you are looking to change. And like Anna said, you really set reasonable expectations. You don't want to make your team panic, but you want to make them, kind of aware of the challenge that you're facing, and kind of, get the team and kind of bring them to we're all in this together and this is what we're going to overcome in a really positive sort of frame of mind.
Yeah, you can't boil the ocean, right? So decide who's our greatest, what can we solve in the shortest term that's our greatest risk, and focus on that. Mm-hmm. So knowing those health scores and triaging to say we can't go to our 5,000 customers and save them all tomorrow. Like, who are the 50 we can deal with this week? And then that is sort of my second recommendation, is start daily stand-ups with key stakeholders from the organization. Like, let's get together every day and talk about retention risks. Let's talk about wins. Let's talk about losses. Like, you definitely have to talk about wins because you've got to keep the balance there.
Yes.
But let's get everybody in a room that can help us move the ball forward and talk about sort of, what bleeding do we need to stop today? And I think that's super important for sure. And
even if you're a remote team, you can do daily stand-ups. Like, we do them on Slack with our remote folks. So it's not necessarily about you getting everyone in a room, just making sure that you're talking about what the main goal is every day.
Yeah. I love a remote stand-up. Somehow they're even more efficient.
Yeah.
And then you've had some good success with sort of the win backs, right?
Yeah. So, well, I was at FreshBooks. We actually ran an experiment on this where myself and one of my colleagues were focused on nothing but win backs for a month. So I'd say that the important thing here, we figured out, okay, who is our ideal customer? Which one of our churned customers look most like this? Because like Anna said, some customers are just, it wasn't the right fit, all kinds of different factors. But figuring out who are most likely to come back. So we did lots of phone calls, emails, tons and tons of A/B testing to kind of figure out how can we do this in a way that has a positive ROI. And that's really what you want to watch when you're doing something like this. It is easy to say, okay, we'll get our best salespeople on the phone and just have them calling, to do win backs all day. I would say be very cautious about that. In the end, our experiment kind of broke even. So after you put in all the costs of paying the team that was working on it versus the customers we lost, break even. So, I mean, that's a good lesson to learn as well, is to kind of figure out what can we do in terms of automation and, drip campaigns and that kind of stuff. And really what we did there is, my recommendation was to do a lot more preventative work. And that's where we were able to really see a positive ROI rather than just the break even of the more high touch situation.
Yeah, I love that. And I like to think about the win back period is from the moment somebody cancels, even if they, or indicates that they're going to cancel, whether it's through a usage issue thing that's happening online or through a sort of sales and customer success organization. Like, it's not that they've already churned. It's like, you know that they're going to, and what are you doing aggressively to win them back? You know? So I think too, thinking about, it's not, you know, sort of, it's not over till the fat lady sings.
Exactly. Yeah. Once they've pushed the cancel button and, you know, got their credit card out of there, it is very difficult to win them back. So you really want to look at that period where that customer is at risk, and that's where you can have the biggest benefit.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, just a few more, and then we're almost at the tail end, but I'm a big fan of WalkMe type technology. So when somebody logs in for the first time, when somebody logs in, you know, throughout, that there is something helping them and something present and something guiding them. If, let's say, there's a high value feature they're not using, something guiding them towards that. So because we can't, it's not all about human intervention, you know, especially sort of on a self-service product. We need this. We can't have customer success calling everybody saying, hey, what about this feature? So using WalkMe technology to replace what might be done by a human, but it's far more effective because it's you know, so as long as you can get them to log in, which sometimes that's a challenge, but assuming you can get them to log in, getting a WalkMe technology can get people doing the things you want them to do that help retain them. So I'm a big fan of that.
So I'm going to jump in on that for a sec, if that's all right. Excellent. Yeah, so, I mean, we've definitely come a long way from, you know, Clippy in Windows 95, but really like making sure that you are driving people to take the right actions and really like helping them guide the customer journey inside of your product. So that could be anything from checklists, which LinkedIn and Dropbox do a really good job of, to just messaging and kind of pop-ups in the app, but really guiding the customer so that they feel really confident, especially during that onboarding time, because that's really the most important thing, is having your customer be confident and see the value right away.
And to your point, right, like, so retention risks start in onboarding. I mean, really they start in sales, but it's like, you know, you're thinking, why does WalkMe technology for onboarding help my retention? It absolutely helps your retention. And if you have a retention problem and it's urgent, like, it's important to prioritize day one things too, not just sort of, you know, the end of the rope kind of things. So just a couple more. And one is just, I will tell you about this sort of Swarm initiative, which I like. I have a lot of my friends who run SaaS businesses have adopted this. We adopted it at our company, and it's something it's just getting this mentality of like, if there's a friction point that that we know a customer is experiencing, that you're enabling the whole organization to drop what they're doing and help solve that friction. Because friction is, when you have usage, if you get over the usage hump, friction is the next sort of thing that really hurts your retention chances. So enabling and just empowering, right? That you can tap somebody on the back and they will not give you a hard time. They will not say that they're feeling interrupted. Like, and it's sort of, there's pros and cons to this, but I've always found that the pros outweigh it, because everybody then is thinking about their role in retention and how they can help each other. And it's not just on the customer success team or the support team to do it. It's like everybody's empowered to do it, and everybody needs to make everybody else feel good about their help, right? That they're not being burdened. I mean, nothing worse than, you know, trying to solve an urgent issue and feeling like you're burdening another colleague to do so. So I always try and create this sort of swarm mentality, especially in urgent retention problem environments. If somebody were to say, here's the one though, I will say the whole webinar could be about this one, Casey. If somebody says to me, what can I do tomorrow to improve my retention? I always say in product chat. It's my number one favorite thing to do.
Yep, I am a big fan of that as well. So I was at Olark Live Chat for quite a few years, and this is where you're going to learn so much about your customers, and you also have the opportunity to help them right at that point. So they're not going to get frustrated because you'll be there right from the start. Yeah, I definitely second this, Anna, from like a learning perspective, to figure out what kind of questions people are asking, where they're stumbling, what words they're using. I mean, from like a customer research point of view, it's just like so much gold in there, but really being there before the customer has a chance to get frustrated. Like, they don't even have to Google a solution. You are there to help.
Yeah, and I think, so much of retention is about usage and getting people to log in and use it. So once you have them logged in, if they encounter friction and they have to stop their workflow and go outside and do a support ticket or do a search or whatever it may be, and they can't do it right there when they're working, you've lost an engagement sort of usage moment, and that you might not ever get it back. Attention is so limited that, and sort of frustration levels are, sort of so high that I find this to be so transformative for day one customers and year 3 customers, that just giving them that knowledge that you're not going to interrupt their workflow and they're going to be able to solve a problem. It is huge. I'm just a huge fan of it. So that's really it, right? Whatever it takes, find your whatever it takes. I will say too, again, I'll just reiterate that one, and especially when you're facing a crisis. But that's a wrap. Right? A great product, the right customers, quick time to value, active SaaS. So you're pushing to the customer, not making them come to you. You're always reminding them. And then we talked a lot about that customer retention culture, KPIs or OKRs for every department, renewal starting on day 1. Customer success is a mindset and a way of doing business, not just a department, and it's really not on their shoulders. Thinking about how customers will grow and stay, and it does require intervention. They don't do that on their own. Customers and vendors do tend to drift apart. Keeping your customer health metrics visible, and deciding whatever it takes is. And that's it. I think we are done for now, Mark. So if you have questions, Casey and I are ready.
Yeah, great. So just one thing I want to add in there. There's one great book that has been not only recommended lots, but also read by lots of CEOs that I've worked for, and that's Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. It's the Rockefeller Habits, and so really focus on KPIs and OKRs. So I've read it a couple times. I'm a fan, and of course, companies that I've worked for have implemented them, and we've always seen a turnaround. So I do have one question. That's here, a little bit off topic, but I think highly relevant for churn. Email drip campaigns, great for marketing, etc. Automation, is it still valuable? Some people think it's maybe becoming less useful because there's emails coming from anywhere. So I personally am just a marketer, so my response is yes, absolutely. It is such a significant and important channel, but I would, it is something that you need to be very careful of. It can easily be overused, and you only have so much social capital to take away, and if you abuse that, then of course you won't be as impactful. So when you do send an email, hopefully you're at a point with the company, you haven't overused email. When that comes in and your customer sees that it's from Joe from your company or that company name, they want to have that. They want to kind of get excited. They want to be like, "Oh, great! I haven't heard from them in a while. What are they saying?" So back to you guys on this one.
You know what,
Casey?
Yeah, you know what, Mark, you said a lot of the things I was going to say, especially about the social capital. Like, you have a certain amount of goodwill with your customers, and you do not want to take advantage of that. So make sure that when you are sending email, it is targeted, it is full of value, it is relevant to them. I've seen open and click-through rates skyrocket once we did really personalized, targeted emails. So it's not about having the same message for everybody. It's doing things by industry, by what they've done in the product, by job title. You really want to make sure that you're sending people valuable information and not just emailing them because you send emails on Thursdays. Like, if you don't have anything to say that Thursday, not being afraid to say, you know what, we don't have anything this week. Next week, we're going to have a lot of great value, and we'll just send them a newsletter then. So that'd be my point of view on it. I'm with you, Mark.
And I would just say, like, because the value thing, right? We both of you said it, it's so important. And a lot of times people, somehow there's a disconnect. They don't know what that really means. So I always say, like, every sentence in the email, does it pass the so what test? So if you read an email sentence and you say, so what? Like, there's got to be, that's value, right? Like, so why are you saying it? Just to say it? Like, there's got to be a so what. So yeah, I think that's a good litmus test to put your emails through to make sure that they are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just returning to some of the, oh, here's a follow-up question. Long versus short email. It's short. I mean, everyone's time is so limited. The quicker you answer that question, I mean, I even find in the organizations that I've worked for, get to the point, even if it's just internal emails, the quicker that you can put your perspective, your comment, your question out there, the better.
And I'll give you a third choice from this, because I'm with you on the short, but also visual, right? The more you can just sort of give a quick visual and somebody gets it and understands it and they don't have to read, or they have to read less, is really helpful too. Yeah,
so I'm a fan of using Cloud App for that. So it's kind of a screenshot tool, but it adds lots on top of that. So you can quickly take a screenshot. It puts a link in your clipboard and you can annotate it afterwards. So if you paste that in Slack, it opens right away. If you put it in an email, that happens right away. So it's a very good way to share visually. Great point, Hannah. So there is there was a couple questions at the beginning talking about the best of breed churn rate and certain numbers. And I know we're a little over here, so thanks everyone for attending. If you do have questions, we're going to hang out for a little longer. Please throw them in the Q&A. So as talking churn, most of the time it's in months, but you can also get it calculated in years. So if you're using a service like Profitwell or Baremetrics, ChartMogul, etc., they usually report it in a monthly percentage. So typically, that's how you'll have it approached, how we're talking about it. Anna, Casey, how about yourselves? Industry churn rates, and then monthly or yearly?
Yeah, so I would say, because I've seen monthly, quarterly, and yearly, and I think the thing, I was talking to a VC a few days ago, and they were saying, it's really funny how you'll be talking to a company and they'll say their retention rate, but you are a few more questions in, and it's nothing like what they were told, right? And that's because there is this sort of, is it gross, is it net, is it monthly, is it quarterly, is it annually? So I would say more important is just knowing exactly what you're measuring and saying, saying it. We have, this gross monthly churn, and knowing that you're saying the right number, because this is the other thing. Sometimes people don't know, again, going back to those definitions, and I still always have to sort of think before I say it to make sure I'm saying the right one, but just being clear about what you're measuring and being clear when you say it then. So you're not making false, sort of high expectations maybe, and then the VC heard it wrong if you're going to, sort of look at institutional capital or anything like that. It's just, I don't know that I have a preference more than just articulating what you're measuring.
Yeah. And I would say along those lines, like consistency is key, so that you are always, it is more about the trend and how your numbers are progressing. Like just pick one that makes sense for your company, for your business, for your industry, and then stick with it and really make sure everybody knows what exactly you're measuring. Nothing worse than that person goes on vacation and somebody else tries to report the numbers, and then it's like a totally different number, and panic and frustration abounds. So consistency is key.
Yeah, just to roll on to that, I was working for a CEO whose brother was in the Coast Guard, and they say the sky is blue. And so what the Coast Guard does is they repeat that 3 times to ensure that communication is successful. So I will say it, the sky is blue. Casey will then say the sky is blue, and then I will repeat the sky is blue. Therefore, that you've been very clear in your conversation. So we started practicing that, and it changed the organization because everyone became very clear. Okay, we're talking monthly churn.
Yep.
So 2 questions here, just quickly. One about culture, one about video content. You talked about culture and people touch points with customers. Any tips on growing your team's soft skills to engage meaningful customer interactions? It's as much about customers getting value as it is about the outcomes they get from your product. Any best practices to improve those customer touches across the organization?
So one of the things that we did at FreshBooks that I was a big fan of is everybody on the team got $300 a month to spend on customers. So whether it was, a customer and they mentioned that it was their birthday, or they were getting married, or they had a baby, you had permission to go find their registry and send them a gift. Or if somebody was very frustrated, you also can send them something to make it right. or if it's, you know, whatever you can do, but really giving people that kind of freedom and support. And then also in the company being able to share, you know, those cool stories about, hey, this customer was frustrated because it turns out like their mouse wasn't working and that's why they couldn't use the product, and just being able to, you know, solve the problem for them or recommend a course or that kind of thing. But really just encouraging that was really key to just supporting those kind of soft skills and that kind of attitude that you want your team to have.
Yeah, I would echo for sure, just sort of like that, the customer stories help build empathy, successes and failures and problems. So the more storytelling you can do inside the organization, but also I think going back to the root is like hiring and screening for empathy across the organization. And you know, if you have curiosity and you have empathy, regardless of the department you're in, then that sort of customer first, customer retention culture can be built. So I think it's going back to making sure you're hiring for that, no matter the role. And I'll just say so that's the root, like start from the beginning, hire the right people. But sort of sometimes when we're building a customer retention culture and we don't maybe have those soft skills, I do a lot of like, it sounds so silly to say it, but there's a couple of Dr. Seuss books that I will use and I will send them to everybody on the team and then share sort of in a group session, like why that had to do, you know, Green Eggs and Ham is a good one, or The Little Engine That Could sometimes. And there's a few different books, but there's even like a SpongeBob episode that I'll bring customer success teams in to watch that is just like so perfectly illustrates our role and some of the challenges we have with our role in customer success, and certain things are our responsibility and certain things we, you know, aren't in our control. But I think you have to think about things you can do like that build the soft skills if you haven't hired for empathy and curiosity. But I do think hire the right people and it won't be a problem.
So video content in email, how do you guys feel? Some tools similar to Vidyard?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Vidyard. I think they're doing a bunch of cool things, and it's really easy for people to send personalized videos to your clients. And I mean, I'm a big fan of like A/B test everything, but video is something that a lot of people love to get. They can get all of the information. It gives a face to your brand. So I am a big fan, but definitely, of course, A/B test to see if it works for your customers.
Yeah, definitely A/B test it, but it can build empathy in your customer, right? So if you have a customer who's disengaged, for example, even just hearing a voice, seeing, you know, a face can build that empathy and that reciprocity, like, oh, I do need to not be so disengaged or something. Yep. So there's a lot of different ways that hits. But I agree with you, Casey, you got to A/B test it.
Yeah, so interesting question here. Company sells digital services to our clients, so the clients don't log in to use our services. That's a little outside our box since this is really focusing on software as a service. So maybe you want to shoot us an email. We'll do our best to answer that afterwards. But thanks for being here. Thanks for asking the question. Next question: should we fire our not ideal customers or let them just churn quietly? I don't know if they're going to churn quietly, but go ahead.
Yeah. So actually, let me really quickly on the login thing though, because it was slightly off center, but even software, right? Like just getting customers to log in can be such a challenge. So going back to some of the things we said, no matter what it is, and you're trying to get people to log in, you've got to give them a reason to log in, right? Why are they not logging in? You've got to really look at that. Is there a reason for them to log in? Is it not being perceived as valuable? Are they disengaged? Should they never have bought it? You know, were they sold something incorrectly? So I think that is a challenge. But
can I jump into that question also before we get to the fire? I think like some of the metrics that you can use, I mean, don't discount the idea of just sending out a quick SurveyMonkey or Google Forms to your customers. Really, if it's just like a quick 3-question survey, you can give them like a $10 Starbucks gift card if you're not getting any responses. But really things like that, just to get like, are they happy with our services, or are they just using us because they've been using us before and it's the switch cost is too high? Like that'll give you a really good idea. And then give people an option like, hey, can I call you to talk about this more? But there are a few things that you can do just to talk to your customers more and get some feedback. And I'll let you go and talk a little bit about the next question.
So this question comes up a lot. Should I fire those customers that are not really on our ICP and are going to churn anyway? I'm not a big fan of it. And I know some people are, so this is debatable. I just believe that every ripple, right? Every little stone in the pond is a ripple. And if somebody wants to stay, even if you know they're going to churn, you need to let them stay and not even bring up not staying, because they're going to be out there either advocating for you or not. And you want to make sure they have a good experience. So if somebody's not having a good experience because they're not your ideal customer, then I think you need to let them go gracefully, right? Don't fight that. Never fight saving somebody that's not in your ideal customer profile. But, you know, forcing the churn early, it's just, first of all, it's a waste of your energy. Like, you're going to have this big initiative to fire the bad fit customers when you could have been spending time trying to save the good fit customers. So I don't even think it's the right place to put energy, but I'd be curious to know what both of you think, because I know a lot of people do think it's a good idea.
Yeah, so I think, like I will say in the past, I have fired customers, but normally it was because they were, it was a situation where they were being disrespectful or abusive or something like that to my team.
Yeah.
So in those cases, I mean, never think that you need to, you know, keep a client just to keep them. And that's something that I tell to my team, especially my support team as well. I want them to know that we as a company have their back. And if somebody is, you know, being disrespectful, like that's not the kind of company that we're building. But yeah, I think, and I agree with you in that you don't want to, if we all have limited time and resources. So instead of worrying about figuring out like who's going to leave in 3 months that wasn't a good fit anyway, like why don't we focus on the ones that we can save and, you know, getting more of those positive customers? Because, you know, the people that aren't a fit, it will, you know, I don't want to say it'll work itself out, but there are better spots where you can spend your energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I've done in the past, and I've heard others speak about this, is setting expectations. So most of the time, or it's very common in SaaS, that your best customers or highest paying customers will be the least needy, and then your lowest paying customers oftentimes can be the most needy. And so what I have found effective is setting expectations around customer support and around product development, et cetera, for your certain target markets and also your price points. So if you have a higher price point, do make an effort to answer them and resolve their problems based on the value creation and the price point that they're at. If they are at a lower price point, or you're creating less value for them, do ensure that your expectations are clear. And so, you know, if they do send an email, you say, you know, we're in the office 9 to 5, and we'll get back to you in, you know, 2 to 3 days. So as that email comes in, maybe it goes back and says an expected wait time, or, you know, it's 2 to 3 days. You know, if you want to have a faster response time, you know, that's very, very clearly set out in the plan that you're choosing from the get-go. If you want phone support, you know, implement phone support, say you have 15-minute response time, but also be clear that it also is on a higher price point.
Yeah,
I totally agree, because sales and marketing have so much to do with retention in terms of setting the right expectations, right? When we're setting the wrong expectations, all we're going to do is miss them, and we've got a customer that's going to be really hard to retain from the get-go. So if it's a self-service, do-it-yourself product, those expectations start, you know, with marketing and then copy and content and messaging. And on the sales side, they start with the conversations we have, but you've got to set the right expectations. I so agree.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. There's still a few people on there listening. A couple things I just wanted to mention. There were some books I recommended. I tweeted out a couple. So there's The Rockefeller Habits, which is scaling up. A couple other ones, but that was the most recent one. Happy to have you guys here. We'll stick around for just a few more minutes to make sure that there's any other questions there. That we answered it. I will, we have recorded the entire session, so I will get that downloaded, trimmed up, and up on our YouTube page shortly. I'll send out an email to all the participants. Once again, thanks so much to my grateful hosts, Anna Tallarico and Casey Bain. Thanks so much for sharing your insights and expertise on the subject of churn.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. For those of you that are still around, if you have any other topics that you want us to discuss, or any panelists you'd like me to invite and discuss that type other SaaS subjects, please go ahead and send me a tweet or an email. You can find Casey at Casey Bain on Twitter and Anna at Anna Tallarico on Twitter as well. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark.